Hey YouTube, I'm Mr. Terry, a high school history teacher, and thanks for coming back to a History Teacher Reacts. Now today I'm going to be checking out a video that our patrons voted on, and that is how did the Bubonic Plague, which is the Black Death, actually end? And this is by the Infographics show. This is great because, I know people are very interested in, of course, the pandemic that's been going on, and the big reference people always go to is like the Black Death. It's the most famous global pandemic that has ever happened back in the Middle Ages. And I think it's a good question of like, how did it end? Did it just kill those that came in contact with it and didn't have a strong enough immune system, or what? So I think this will be interesting and very timely. Anyway, thanks again, patrons, for voting this. If you'd like to vote on videos to get kind of fast tracked on this channel to getting my attention, you can join that. You can get access to all the polls. There's also certain fun merch and stuff that you can get for subscriptions. And if you haven't seen some of my other things I got going on, we got a Teespring store if you want just some fun history designs. Got some cool clothes for you. My gaming channels, a bunch of other things. But let's go ahead and get to it. The original video link is down below. Be sure to support the Infographics show. They do some awesome things. And let's go ahead and get to it.
The Black Death surged unstoppably throughout Eurasia for years, killing people in painful, excruciating ways within days of infection. Almost no one who caught it stood a chance. By the time it was done, about a third of the world's population lay dead. So how did this deadly, widespread contagion finally end?
Just think about that. Third of the world's population lay dead. Right? By the way, these numbers they're very hard to get. And that means obviously some places were a lot higher. I mean, some places were, at like 50%, especially in Western Europe. Although the pandemic over there started from Asia and kind of made its way westward through the Silk Road, it had an especially devastating effect out there in the West. And maybe that's for the reason of immunity problems, where people that aren't exposed to certain germs more often usually don't have immunity to the diseases that they cause. Good example of that would be, Europeans bringing things like smallpox over to the Americas, which devastated those populations, where up to 90% of people ended up dying. But yeah, makes you feel thankful that we can, avoid this type of third of the world population's death for the most part. Who knows about the future, though, right?
Europe in 1347. Famines, tuberculosis, smallpox, beheadings, STDs. Old age seemed like the least common way for anyone to die at the time. Even giving birth gave you good odds of ending up in the grave.
True.
In this time of generally widespread disease and danger, no one could have imagined a plague which would undo all the other plagues thus far. And
back to the giving birth thing. We live in such a privileged time today that not only can we treat so many diseases and things, but the childbirth thing is huge because, like they were saying, it was very common for you to potentially die in childbirth. And also because of lack of a lot of medical knowledge, a lot of infants didn't survive the childbirth, or they didn't survive adolescence. That's why our population today is so big, and our death rates are so low now. Not that people are necessarily, I mean, they're living longer for the fact that less people are dying of disease, but the biggest increase in our population is infant mortality is, minuscule compared to what has historically been.
was about to make its horrific entrance. Of course, Europeans had heard of the great pestilence that was spreading through the Middle East and Asia. However, in a situation that thankfully would never be repeated again, they just kept going about their business, hoping the problem would fix itself before really affecting them. And yet, one day, undeterred by state lines, the Bubonic Plague made its European debut. 12 ships.
One of the things I give out in my class for the Middle Ages, for the Black Death, with especially my AP students, is different documents coming out of Europe that, even from like medical professionals of the time, talking about what they believe are like the origins of the plague. And it's crazy. They say they'd heard about it in the East, but they did not understand. They did not have a consensus about how it spread and stuff like that. like none of them are writing about rats carrying germs, right? Germ theory didn't exist, but like even mentioning like the rats, which is really what they think is the vehicle there. It was so many different things. A lot of it was astronomical, and of course there was a lot of religious things, but there were all types of different things that were just not the right answers, and that's from leading professionals in the communities.
The Black Sea docked in the sunny Sicilian port of Messina, and people working on the docks went to greet the sailors and get the cargo. That's when they noticed something odd. Most of the sailors were dead, and the few who remained alive were
first
covered
hit
in
Europe
disgusting
in
black
Italy
boils,
'cause of shipping.
hemorrhaging blood, and
From the
pus.
Black
No one
Sea
knew
to the
exactly what was
Mediterranean.
going on, but getting all the ships and boil-covered sailors as far away from Messina as possible seemed like a good call. To where, they didn't really care. Sicilian authorities told the death ships to leave the port. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Not only was the bubonic plague one of the most virulent, contagious diseases known to man, and thus had probably already spread to some dock workers in the brief contact they had with the sailors, the flea-ridden rats that had originally infected the sailors had already abandoned the ship.
Now, I know this is going to be more about the end. They're giving you the history of the beginning and the rats being a big thing. Now, pest control is such a simple thing today, but rats were like an everyday part of life and through much of history. It's like they were in your house, and they were they're very good at surviving. They could survive about anywhere. They would get on ships that have cargo, and then the rats would kind of latch onto that cargo. Rats can swim, so they get their way onto ships, and that's what they believe happened. Is these ships coming from maybe like the Black Sea and then the Eastern Mediterranean would come into to the Mediterranean, into Italy, and those ships carried rats carrying the disease, and then that's how it gets there. Because when you look at a map of the spread of the Black Death here in Europe, it starts in Italy and then kind of spreads north from there.
Scurrying their way right into the cobblestone streets of Messina. From Messina, the plague spread through Italy up to France, Germany, and even London within the year. Even in the time of such slow, arduous travel, the Black Death tore its way through the continent with unimaginable force and speed. Between 1346 and 1353, the Black Death killed a higher proportion of the world population than any other singular event in history. It killed 25 million people in Europe in a period of 4 years, and over this climax of its spread is estimated to have destroyed 75 million lives worldwide. Keep in mind, this was during a time when the entire global population was estimated to be around 380 million.
So percentage-wise,
some
it's
estimates
just
even
crazy.
put the plague's total death toll higher, at around 200 million, and global population estimates higher as well. However, even the minimum death count is horrifying to comprehend. It took 200 years for the world to rebuild its population to pre-plague levels. We assume part of the
200
reason
years,
for
that's
the
crazy,
lengthy repopulating process was that seeing boil-covered humans and death all around you for years is bound to have an effect on your sex drive. But for the world population to bounce back, that meant the Black Plague had to end. So how did it? Did it just run its course, or did people start getting better at stopping the spread and fighting it? The answer is actually nuanced, as is most scientific and medical issues, despite what your self-diagnosis with WebMD might tell you. Many experts have an explanation they favor most, but they
Now,
also...
my prediction was basically just, I mean, the only thing you could do in this type of situation would be to quarantine things, right? And they do that to some extent. They actually did that, but it was such a pernicious disease, and especially when it went airborne and it became even more deadly and easily able to be spread, it seemed like it was unavoidable. And that it's just like, I wonder if basically they think that germs basically got to everybody. But we've seen even today with like modern pandemic, how people react to these germs and react to the ailments very differently. Some have no symptoms at all. They don't even know. Some drop dead quick. It's crazy. And I just assumed with this that it just is a difference of immune systems. And those that had better immune systems, they survived it. And that was it. And everyone that's a descendant of this part of the world, and most parts of the world, basically, because most parts, highly populated parts of the world, other than like the Americas and maybe sub-Saharan Africa, basically came in contact with it. And since most people are descendants of those regions, I guess we'd say we're all ancestors of plague survivors.
agree that the Black Plague ended as a result of a combination of factors. First of all, the extreme deadliness of the Black Plague proved to be a part of its eventual undoing. The disease killed so many people so quickly that at some point it ran out of victims. When the Bubonic Plague struck a person, they quickly fell grievously ill. Symptoms included fevers of 100 to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, nausea, vomiting, severe joint pain, and headaches. The most unique symptoms of the plague were buboes that gave it its name, large egg-shaped boils that oozed pus and blood. Charming. People who usually fell ill became confined to their homes and died within 3 to 8 days. Over 80% of all those infected died. Thus, the odds once you caught the disease were not great. This is why highly deadly pathogens...
And it's slow painful in the fact that while you have it, you're just in excruciating pain. Now, I've heard of stories where, it affects people differently, but some stories of people basically being healthy in the morning by all accounts, and then contracting it, and then they die by the end of the day. Like, I've heard of extreme cases of that.
Have a way of wiping themselves out. A disease that kills so many so fast eventually reduces its own chance of spreading and therefore surviving. At some point, there were literally just not many people left to kill and not that dense a population to work through. Eventually, when people wised up to the fact that staying away from the sick would help them survive. Yeah. See, the second reason the plague ended was because people started trying to prevent its transmission. Doctors initially had no good advice to give the population. This was a previously unknown disease.
By the way, I don't know if they're going to talk about it, but if you didn't know, these scary looking masks, these are plague doctors, and they have this kind of bird beak looking thing. And if you didn't know, that actually has a use. Inside of this beak thing is where they would put like spices and herbs that doctors thought helped them, not contract diseases and stuff like that. So it's pretty freaky, especially if you're dying and this is the last face you see before you die. Not the way you want to go.
Initially had no good advice to give the population. This was a previously unknown disease, and also most doctors at the time thought that leeches helped depression. Unless Gwyneth Paltrow is a medical professional, we generally expect better medical advice and treatment these days.
Gross.
For an example of doctors' opinions about the disease during that era, one plague doctor stated his belief that instantaneous death occurs when the aerial spirit escaping from the eyes of the sick man strikes the healthy person standing near. And
this is the crazy stuff, and this is the stuff I'd heard when we went through documents in my classes of, it's when the moon hits like this certain dew coming off of the ocean water, and these water vapors combine, and then it makes you sick. And it's like all this just like total crap.
Aerial spirit escaping from the eyes of the sick man
it's what they knew,
the healthy person standing near and looking at the sick. He wasn't exactly wrong about the ease of transmission and the fact that the bubonic plague could be spread via the air, but his reasoning as to how and why was
aerial.
Suspect. However, despite the horrific state of medicine at the time, people eventually realized that the more they came into contact with others, the more likely they would be to catch this deadly new disease. So people started escaping the big dense cities of Europe and going to the countryside. However, the plague carried by fleas on rats and livestock followed them out there as well. So more stringent measures were taken. Store owners closed up shops and stayed home. Priests wouldn't administer last rites. Doctors refused to see patients. And given our previous statements, this was probably for the best. And cremation became extremely popular in order to both minimize the existence of plague-carrying bodies and also save space as corpses quickly filled up mass graves. Tragically, people were even forced to leave their sick and suffering family members behind to have a shot at escaping the plague. Thomas Mokaitis, a history professor at DePaul University, explains that people had no real understanding of how to fight it other than trying to avoid sick people. That's why in Italy, where the disease had first infected Europe, they decided to start a new practice. In the Venetian-controlled port city of Ragusa, incoming sailors were kept on their ships in isolation for 30 days. Eventually, the isolation period increased to 40 days, which in Italian was called quarantino. This led to the origin of our current word that we've become way too depressingly familiar with, quarantine. The practice worked, as incoming cases of bubonic plague were greatly reduced. Even with quarantine procedures, however, what was to be done about the fleas and rats transmitting the disease? These two animals still carried the bacteria, known as Yersinia pestis, that spread the plague. Well,
yeah, that's what the germ is. Yeah, Yersinia pestis. That's what causes the Black Death. But yeah, it hitches a ride on these guys. But that's what the germ's actually called.
European cities decided that.
By the way, I don't know if they'll get to this. Yersinia pestis is not eradicated completely. It's been found and pops up every once in a while in different parts of the world. all over, like all continents.
Improving their sanitation procedures would help in this regard, as it does in most regards actually. It turns out that the cleaner a place is, the less fleas and rats tend to congregate there, as most students discover after freshman year in their college dorms. People also strive to improve their personal hygiene, which helped to keep even more fleas at bay. Again, we're unsure why this wasn't a thing before, but apparently people learning to wash their hair more than once a month was the tiniest of silver linings to the horrific mass death of the plague. So the deadliness of the plague itself, combined with quarantine procedures and better sanitation, helped curb the spread of the Black Death. What was the final factor that helped put a stop to it? In 2010, researchers collected DNA from mass graves of Black Plague victims and found that the DNA of the bacteria was vastly different from the current form of the plague. It was a far deadlier strain of the disease. As we said before, highly fatal pathogens must eventually find a way to be less deadly in order to keep their own reproduction going. So the evolution of bacterial DNA helped
that is interesting. So it will evolve quickly, but if it goes too quickly, it becomes too deadly, then it dies out and never goes around. So it's like there's some kind of Goldilocks zone, I guess, of deadliness for a disease that encourages its longevity.
And the deadliness of the bacteria. But that's not the only way DNA transformation helped stop the plague. It turns out human DNA mutations also helped it lose momentum. Apparently, a certain DNA mutation that has been shown to help protect against HIV in humans today first appeared in a widespread way in the population in the 1300s. The most likely reason? A widespread fatal epidemic. The disease didn't cause the mutation. It simply disproportionately affected those without it, leading more of those with the mutation to pass down their genes. A combination of all these factors stopped the plague in its tracks.
It's how natural selection works anyway, right? It's like the strong, they survive that way. They're the ones that are more likely to be able to procreate, carry those genes on. So if you have a better immune system, you're going to survive, therefore likely to have more children, and then your DNA spreads through that. I mean, it's biology, right?
Unfortunately, people at the time also tried to end the Black Death in several ill-advised and horrifying ways. Many believed the plague was in fact God punishing the population for their sins. Therefore, they would have to demonstrate repentance and devotion to God in order to escape the curse. For some reason, some believed the best way to do this was to hunt down and kill anyone they deemed sinful or heretic. When these people asked themselves, what would Jesus do? Their answer apparently was massacre large groups of people, especially Jewish populations, demonstrating that they clearly missed the entire point of their religion.
That I was going to make sure that they talked about the Jewish communities. Jewish communities across Europe were heavily persecuted during this time, as people thought, again, they were bringing some kind of curse upon God, or a curse of God upon them. So even though those people were dying in similar numbers, or the conspiracy theory that people had of it was Jews like infecting people, like poisoning wells and stuff like that. But again, Jews were dying as well.
Other less terrifying but equally ineffective remedies involved doctors telling plague patients to bathe in rose water or vinegar to help cleanse the disease out. This worked about as well as anyone would expect,
essential
which
oils.
is to say, not at all. Turns out rose water does little to stop bacteria with an 80% kill rate. Though the Black Death peaked in the years of 1346 and 1353, it by no means went away after that. Smaller outbreaks would resurge for hundreds of years, with the last notable one being the Great Plague of London in 1665. Some believe the Great Fire of London in 1666 helped put a stop to the disease's spread, as it burned many of the rats and fleas carrying it. But most historians and medical experts dispute that story. However, this last big iteration of the disease did inspire the well-known children's nursery rhyme, Ring a Ring of Roses. Londoners thought holding a posy of flowers up to their nose would help protect them from the plague. This explains the lyric Pocket Full of Posies. A tissue, we all fell down refers to people falling ill and needing tissues and then dropping dead. The original...
Yeah, it's creepy. If you hear the Ring Around a Rosie, it's about the plague. Ring around the rosy, I say, pocket full of posy. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Or dying. It's a gruesome song when you look at it, and it's like a nursery rhyme for kids. One thing I wanted to bring up is the Black Death, they're talking about here in the 1300s. Not the first time this had come around. It had devastated populations, even in Europe before this. The Greeks dealt with it. Like the Athenians died. Didn't Pericles, die of it? The leader of Athens. And then the Romans had it. They were dealing with it. And then the Eastern Romans, the Byzantine Empire, dealt with it. Like it It had been around before. This is just the biggest extent that we saw it.
Lyrics, in fact, were "We all fall down dead," in case you needed further proof that the original versions of children's stories and rhymes were all deranged. Today, the bacteria that caused the Black Death still exists, but it's now treatable with antibiotics. About 7 cases of bubonic plague are reported in the US every year, and around 1,000 to 3,000 worldwide, mostly on the African continent, meaning you have a higher chance of dying by a lightning strike than the plague these days. And now that we know how the Black Death ended and never have to worry about a pandemic tearing through the world again, why not click on this funny video, or this one right here.
All right, no parallels here, right? All right, so yeah, again, in the end, I guess the biggest thing was that what killed off the plague was how deadly it was. It hit people so hard, and it's such a successful death rate, that 80% rate. I believe that's a median from the 2 different forms the plague sort of came. There was the bubonic plague, and then what they call the pneumonic plague. The bubonic one was the first one, and I think that had around a 50 to 60% death rate. And then the like disease or germs often do, they mutate, and then it became pneumonic, which was the one that became more it hit the air. It was aerial bound, and when that happened, that was even more deadly. I think that one was more up to like 90%. So I think that 80% is kind of where the two meet, which again is just insane to think about. And it makes sense now, because I hadn't really thought of it that way, that type of threshold of a death rate is, in the end, I mean, it's devastating, but it will destroy the longevity of a disease. So if something has a lower death rate, like you see a lot of this stuff, like a common flu or something like that, these are things that are germs that they don't kill, because they don't kill so many people. The survival rate is so high. It can't eradicate. It won't be eradicated because it's so common. It's around so much, but it has such a small death rate. So something that has a huge death rate is going to hit hard, but then be gone. And that's basically what happened there. Anyway, thanks for watching the video with me. Thank you, patrons, for selecting this video. I think it's very topical, very great. Infographics is great. I mean, they got 10 million subscribers. You're going to want to make sure that you sub to them, because they have a bunch of cool animated videos like that. And if there's some more, especially from this channel, that you want to see, or any other channel, you can put that down. There's a lot of ways you can do that. Some of the best ways to get a video, if you're not a patron, to get it potentially recognized, actually join our Discord server. We have a channel created in there for video suggestions. You can put them in the YouTube comments, but they can get lost sometimes. So over on Discord is actually one of the best, and that is linked down below. All right, well, again, thank you. Original video link is down below. Make sure you support them and support the original video. And with that, we'll see you next time. Bye.